Great. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Female Finance in Figures event. We're really excited to have you today. Just for a few housekeeping items before we start, if you could please mute your microphones, that would be great. We'll take questions at the end, but feel free to type in your questions in the chat section during the event so that you don't lose what you're thinking about, and we'll make sure we go through all of them. This event is being recorded. You'll see the little red button on your screen, and we will post this online afterwards. Okay, we have a great event prepared for you, and hello everyone, I'm Regina Lau from EWPN. And I'd love to introduce you to a few of our speakers today. We'll start with our co-authors of our research, Erin and Annette, and we'll also talk a little bit to Daria from Keen Innovation, who sponsored both this research as well as our prior research, that the two research reports are related. And also we have another sponsor here on this event today from Bank Cler. So Erin and Annette, let's start with you. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself? We're so excited to have you share your research with us.
Sure, Regina, thank you very much for that lovely introduction, and thank you everyone for being here. Well, I'm Erin Taylor. I'm an anthropologist by training and founder of a company called Anthropology, originally from Australia, but I now live in the Netherlands. And I specialise in doing research into all kinds of financial behaviour, including the work that Annette and I have been doing on financial products for women, also financial inclusion issues, basically anything to do with people and finance.
Right, and I can continue from here. Thank you, Regina. I'm really pleased to be here, and I'm looking forward to this interactive discussion, hopefully. I'm a consultant in strategy and innovation, and I'm an economist by training. I'm based in Denmark. I have a long background working in finance in different capacities, and I find myself getting increasingly intrigued in the human issues of money and finance in an industry that has been driven so much by technology for really a long time. So it's been a great pleasure to co-lead the EWPN Research Network together with Erin and to do these last two reports.
Thank you so much. And I'd love to start with you, Erin. Could you tell us a little bit about what triggered your interest in the female finance ecosystem? This is your second report. Why are you researching in this area?
Certainly, it's a fascinating issue. I'm personally interested in the big question of why would we design financial products for any specific group of human beings, whether it be women or youth or refugees or the elderly, and the potential of financial services to provide solutions that would be important to those groups. As you probably know, the question of women and financial inclusion has been really big over the past few years. The Gates Foundation, for example, invested heavily in it. But financial inclusion isn't just an issue that we associate with socioeconomic development. Financial inclusion is relevant everywhere. And so we got interested in this new trend of companies providing financial services for women specifically, and many of those services existing in the USA, in Europe, in Australia, in Asia, all kinds of places. And so we set out to investigate that and see what's actually out there on the market.
That's great. And Annette, when you released your first report in June of last year, what were some of your key findings? And then how does that relate to your second report?
Well, the first report, we dived into the question of what characterizes services offered directly for women, and why should they be different, and are they different when you look into them? And our main finding, I think, was that first, not much is known in this area, and we need to do much more research. And the second finding was that the characteristics of these products is indeed different, and not just about communication and marketing, but they're really different. I mean, women tend to focus on the story relating to life cycle events over the numbers, not just the events, but also but before the numbers, you might say. Women also tend to take a great interest in the impact, be it society, inclusion, or the sustainability agenda. And they are very interested in working in a trusting community. So network and learning possibilities were characteristics that we found on these services. So that was our first report. you could say that this new report is the flip side of this, because we looked into now what characterizes the market for women. How big is this market? How many services could you actually sell? How many customers are there in this area, and how many $1 billion worth of revenue is there? And also, what characterizes the companies who offer these services? What do they look like? What kind of people are employed in them? And so on.
That's great. I'd love to turn now to Daria and introduce her a little bit. She's from Keen Innovation and has been our sponsor for both the first and the second report, and very generous with your time as well. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about yourself and also what triggered your interest in this research?
Sure, of course. Thank you, Regina. Hello, everyone. Also from my side, I'm very excited to be here today. I'm a customer insight manager at Keen Innovation. Maybe a little bit about Keen Innovation. It is an independent subsidiary of the Basler Kantonalbank Group. So we are, so to say, a research and innovation lab, scouting for, testing, and helping to implement new innovative solutions, products, business models for Basler Kantonalbank and Bank Cler, who is also a sponsor. We have a very strong customer centricity focus at Keen. Everything we do is driven basically by customer insights. And also one of our main goals to find business areas which both our banks could build upon, or find promising customer segments with unsolved needs, problems, and create solutions for them. Well, it's needless to mention that female market is very promising. Yeah, we all know statistics, we know demographics, that women have higher life expectancy. They make or influence 80% of all financial decisions. They tend to manage family budget and so on and so on. At the end, this is half of the population. Yeah, so it's not enough to say this is an important market segment. This is just in reality crucial for success of any firm. And when we started exploring the female market, at least in Switzerland, we noticed that there are really just few solutions offered on the market. Some of them came, of course, from traditional banks, but they were not that concrete and sufficient. Same was with our banks. They didn't have any specific strategy how to target women. So there was a clear call for research in this area. And we were really happy to see the announcement that Erin and Anette and EWPN initiated the first study with the goal to build the first overview of companies serving female customers. And we decided that this will be great if we join our effort. So basically, we took over the Swiss market, research on the Swiss market, and I think the whole collaboration went really well.
That's great. And I understand that you've been looking at several initiatives also with Bank Cler, and in terms of all the different insights, both from these two reports as well as your own research at Keen Innovation, have you implemented anything? And can you tell us a little bit about some of the initiatives you're working on?
Sure. So probably from the first report, one of the most important implications, or which we found important for us, was the fact that women do not necessarily need their own different financial services or products, but what should be different is communication and approach. And this is what Bank Cler is currently trying to implement. So they try to adjust consulting and advisory services in such a way that it appeals to both women and men. So in this kind, we were able to implement the insights from the first study. And the second study is more about diversity and equality in the corporate level, so to say. This is a very important topic for Bank Cler. They run initiatives with this regard regarding equality toward employees and equal pay, and they get certified every year for this. So definitely there are some directions helping them to implement the insights in the future.
That's wonderful. And I guess we will have a very interesting and very lively debate, I think, during our panel discussion, because there's actually many different perspectives that we hope to sort of trigger and hear. And now I'd love to turn it over to you, Erin and Annette, if I could, to sort of give a little bit of an overview of the research now that we've had a chance to learn a little bit more.
Great, thank you so much. I'm just going to put this into presentation mode. So I can move this aside. So thank you, everyone. Regina already asked us about the journey we went on to get to this point. I thought I'd give you a very quick visual of that journey. It actually started when we were asked to write a book chapter on this topic. This book you see on the left-hand side here, Women, Consumption and Paradox. So Annette and I began looking into what financial services are available for women within this book. And we quickly found that it was difficult to find these products, but we were quite certain there were more out there, and that is why we produced the second report, which I won't dwell upon now, but you can see the pretty front cover on the right-hand side. So in the second report, which you see on the left-hand side of this slide, what we did was we focused much more on the organisations themselves, the locations they're in, the age of the companies, the values they hold, and so on and so forth. Annette will present these insights in a few minutes. But yes, we looked much more into just those particular, we wanted to know who were the organisations behind these services, why would they decide to focus on women, and how would they go about that? So what did we do is the next question. Well, from the first report, we already had a fairly significant data set. For the first report, we managed to find around, I think it was about 64 companies that offer financial services explicitly for women. So we had that in our database. We decided to expand upon that and look for more companies. And so we ended up with a total of around just over 100 companies. And we extended the data points we had collected, because originally we focused much more just on the services themselves. But this time we went digging for information about the companies and who is employed in them and so on and so forth. We also collected external data, looking at statistics, trying to find out about the market for financial services. So we could then say, okay, we know these companies exist, but what is the market they exist in? And so we tried to map that out. This is probably one of the most interesting infographics that we have in the report. This is the ecosystem infographic. We had this infographic in the first report, but this one's quite different from the first one. First of all, there are many more companies in it because we were able to identify many more companies. But secondly, we've gone about presenting the companies in a way that is a little bit different from normal. So I think in most infographics of fintech ecosystems, you have services kind of grouped by, payments and credit insurance and so on. And we have done that here. But one thing we noticed that in this sphere, there are a lot of services that are not necessarily traditional products, such as, apps or bank accounts or so on and so forth, but they're still very important to women. And one area in particular where we noticed this was financial management. So there are actually, as well as a lot of new financial management apps for women, you also have an increasing number of companies offering financial advisory services to women. And they may not be digital at all, they may be one-on-one advice. But why is this important? Well, it's important because research tends to show that women do like one-on-one advice, and they do often prefer it to come from women. So we were curious to find so many companies offering financial advice specifically to women itself. And we tried to reflect in this infographic the fact that it's not just about the tech, it's not just about the service itself, it's also about the delivery. So in the little octagons that come out of the side of the infographic, that's where we have those different kinds of services, which might be advisory services, or they might be networks and opportunities, community learning, and so on and so forth. Now, coming back to the market, Daria already gave a little bit of an overview of some of the things we found. This infographic, which is the 2-page spread, is an attempt to show some of the important facts we need to think about when we're trying to conceptualize the market in financial service for women. The first one, and is the figure you might have seen floating around on social media, is this 700 billion figure, which is the amount that financial services firms miss out on by not catering to women. That is a huge amount of money. So then that begs the question, okay, well then, what is it about the women's market that is so important? And so below that figure, we've included facts like women make up 40% of the workforce, women make 80% of financial decisions, control 85 to 89% of consumer spending, and so forth. So there's a huge market there, and those facts sort of back up that number. On the right-hand side, though, we show something different, which is some of the inequalities that still exist. For example, that women usually can't borrow as much money as men, women around the world are less likely to have a bank account, and so on. There are a number of different things there. I'll now hand over to Anette, who will continue from here with the insights.
Yes. Thank you, Erin. And as you can see, and as you will see further on, we're going to run through some of the results using the infographics that we used to illustrate the report. So this report is much more visual than it is just about words, but I'll try to run you through some of it and end commenting on the recommendations that we made at the end, which I think will form a good bridge to the dialogue that we're going to have with the panel afterwards. So what you see here is a question of where and what. We found, like Erin said, just about 100 initiatives in these areas, and as you can see, most of them are in North America and Europe. This could very well be because we have a language bias, and it could also be influenced by the fact that we did not go into the very large specific sector of microfinance, which is apparent, for instance, in Africa as well, for want of working with it. So this is an area that would be great to go into at a later stage. On the right-hand side, what you can see in the circle diagrams here is that there are quite marked differences between the number of companies that we found in different areas providing different services. So in North America, over half of the companies were in startup funding, and in Europe we had almost half the companies in investment. So there's really a surge of investment services for women in the European market at the moment. And in Australia, I think we have a good illustration of what Erin just talked about before. We see a large number of one-person or two-person companies arising, offering networks and advisory service and contacts to women who want to manage their finances themselves. Next slide, please. And this illustrates the year where these initiatives were founded. And as you can see, there are very few that come before the millennial, and quite a large number initiated during the last 5 years. And I think that is what I'm going to say about this for now. It's really surging at the moment, so it will be really great to return to this and pick up and see how it goes. And also it's very interesting to see if this is a phenomenon that's in passing, because perhaps everyone find out that they would like the services that are made to custom, like made to female, or if they will disappear because they're no longer needed because we all have the same background. So that's really interesting to follow. Next slide, please. And here we come back to what both Regina and Erin were talking about earlier, the question of what characterizes these services. On the left-hand side, you can see one main illustration being that a very large part of more than 2/3 actually of the companies that we surveyed provide either a community or a learning opportunity or both to the women that they serve, and only about just below 1/3 do not offer this kind of services. So this is a marked characteristic of these services. And also we try to describe a little bit, following up from the last report, what characterizes the services for women, that they are actually very much designed for women, with features particularly for women and based on women's values. So I would say that this is not, and this is an interesting debate to follow, because this is not just the wrapping that's different. This is not just making a pink credit card. This is asking women what they'd like to do. And going back in time, I could mention an example perhaps of this, where we saw that you could scan and pay in, as you can do in many places, it's not very practical with a phone. If you need to scan a QR code with your phone and you have a cart to move around and 2 children in a bag, can get really tricky. So these are the kind of things that you need to take into account when you're trying to serve your customers, and in particular the women. So next slide, please. And then we tried to look at the different values. So we looked at value statements in the companies that we covered and the missions. And we did these word clouds, and we compared it to a number of similar companies in profile, but just providing services that are both for men and for women. And as you can see, if you dive into this, there's very much about helping, about building, about visions, about community values on companies that we looked into, and the others much more of profit and risk and performance in the general financial services. This is just a small sample, so perhaps this is something that one should dive more into, but really an interesting area to look into. Next slide, please. The last thing that we looked into was the startup companies who provide these kind of services. So this is not the whole number of companies that we looked into, and that is because a large bank providing a female service may not give the information on this kind of service, who founded it, who were the employees, and what kind of leaders do they have. But for the independent companies, we looked into the leaders, we looked into the founders, we looked into the board members and the employee, and we share them in gender. I won't go into the technicalities, but I think you can see that more than 3/4, and for the founders up to 90%, were in really high female percentage institutions. So where you should have thought perhaps that women would like a more diverse environment, this is actually not yet the case. They seem to be very focused on working with women and for women. And perhaps that is necessary in the starting phase for new services. Next slide, please. So what we looked into underlines what Erin already talked about. We looked into the backgrounds of the female founders. This is just sort of screen scraping from LinkedIn and from profiles described on the websites. But it shows that they usually come with a good financial knowledge, maybe from the high-end banks already. They have entrepreneurial experience. They don't come with a heavy tech background, which is quite interesting in a technology-heavy industry like banking and financial services. So this could be a good reason for seeing different services as well. And I think that was most of what I wanted to say. I'll just, if you would put on the next slide, Erin, please. Oh yes, we need to talk about the recommendations, and that is, I think, perhaps the most important. We would say that to understand this, we need to understand the female market. So for companies who want to dive into the market that Erin talked about, the large profitable possibilities, it is a question of understanding the market, of working with the females, of doing the numbers, and perhaps working with other organizations to learn from them on how to build systematic data on initiatives and results. And we think it's also very much a question of adapting the product development process so as to be more customer focused, like Daria already explained, instead of being just based on transaction data, which is also why we think it's important to develop holistic value propositions that we talked about and to work with communities and learning possibilities. Possibly this could be done very much by going into partnerships with different kinds of partners, be they academics or researchers like us, or like Keen Innovation, and or like different other fintechs that we see in other areas. So with this, I think we come to the end of the presentation. If you change the slide, we would just like to say that there is a lot more to be done. I already mentioned values and microfinance, but we also would very much like to go into female customers' behaviors in more depth and to understand the inequality as it develops and how the culture plays in this area. So much more to be done. And if you'd like to talk about that, give us a call.
Great. Thank you so much, Erin and Annette, for sharing. And for those of you who have not had a chance to see the research, you can go to our EWPN website and actually download your own copy today. Just enter in a few pieces of information and you'll be able to access the report. It was such an interesting report because as I was going through the drafts with Erin and Annette, I had so many questions, and not only did it just raise questions about, you know, the state of the fintech industry today, but also too where DE&I fits in. And to some degree, some people think that the fintech industry, being such an open industry, and really that's what makes fintech so interesting, is actually the perfect place to talk about DEI, and then of course have products and services that are not only personalized, but also able to reach people of all backgrounds. So with that, I'd love to move us into the panel discussion. And I had mentioned a little bit earlier, there was a bit of a joke that it was a bit of a debate. And what I mean by that is that when we all got together to, as a group, to talk about this event today, we had so many opinions, and it was just, even the prep sessions were really exciting. So we're very excited to introduce you today to a few of our panelists, or to all of our panelists, I mean, Maya Salzmann, Luc Haldimann, and Lukas Smith. Maya is a non-executive board member at Bank Cler, and she's also the chairperson at Bright Entertainment. She's had a long and successful career in securities and private banking, and has covered like a wide geography, from Russia to London and Tel Aviv to Cape Town, so very well traveled. Luc is co-founder and CEO of Unblu, a company that helps the world's really leading banks and insurance companies improve customer experience and also boost their transactions. They have and own a conversational banking platform, really one of the first. He's a tech entrepreneur and previously co-founded Optree, a successful content management software company. And I'd love to also introduce you to Lukas. He is co-founder and CTO of Witty Works, a company that is revolutionizing the way how people write through AI-based software. And these products help companies apply inclusive language consistently. And their products also help raise awareness of the impact of unconscious bias. He's very well known in the open source community, frequently contributing, and also speaks quite frequently about diversity and inclusion. And with that, I'd love to start our panel. And so if our panelists, if you don't mind opening up your mics, I'd love to start by talking a little bit about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I guess the way how we'll organize this next section is that we have some key points we'd like to make and get the perspectives of our panelists. And of course, if you have anything where you have questions about, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll certainly get to them closer to the end so that we don't interrupt the panel discussion itself. And so the first point we'd like to raise is that diversity, equity, inclusion has not only just become a significant headline in the last several years, but oftentimes we talk about it in terms of recruitment and also how companies can create diverse teams. But Erin and Annette's research has also indicated that companies need to consider products and services from a gender diverse lens. And that's not always talked about. So it's what makes their research quite interesting and exciting. And what are your thoughts on this? And what do you think we need to keep in mind? I'm gonna open it up to the panel.
Okay, then if you let me start as the only female on the panel about the female topic.
Yep.
It's definitely true. I mean, besides having a diverse team, thinking broader potentially doesn't mean that men can't put in a female lens, but naturally it takes a broader range of people to cover all the topics. And what also I believe is so important in reaching women for investments and loans and products in general is the way you advise people, have an understanding. And interestingly enough, while Daria was mentioning before, answering your question, what the bank has changed on the understanding of the research, first of all, we abandoned a program specially made for women called EVA, because lots of women today don't want to be invited to female-only events. It's like you're tired of it. Women have found their position in many ways, even though topics are not just female-related. So we abandoned that. On the other hand, we created workshops for unconscious bias to actually sensibilize people, the employees, how biased we can be without realizing it. So that was the inside. And on the outside, work on the advice and definitely on products. Don't sell us pink products, as is also mentioned. It's ESG is a topic, clearly, and understandable. Make it easy, simple, understand it, allow questions, don't use jargon. Banking language is very offending sometimes and more aggressive. So definitely, from my view.
Yeah, maybe something to add. I mean, I think diversity and inclusion has like two sides to it. So one is the justice side, that, is just simply fair to allow everyone to participate. But diversity and inclusion, and there are, plenty of studies that have illustrated this, have a direct effect on the ability to innovate, the ability to, to really see the entire picture, just like Maya just mentioned. Obviously, you can learn some aspects of the realities that women are facing as a man, but you will never internalize it to the same level, and that applies to all dimensions. You need people that are maybe a little bit older, some are younger, different socioeconomic backgrounds to really understand. And if your customer base is diverse, then you need a diverse team to serve that. And in that spirit, next to the justice dimension to diversity, there is a productivity dimension. And I think this question really speaks to that, if you want to serve and be productive for your entire customer base, you also need to be diverse internally.
So what we are seeing with our customer base is that we have been approaching the advisory actually from a part where we have, in our company, we have a female user interaction designer, which was very positive on the outcome of our usability. We are very often ahead of what we see in competitive pitches of other products in terms of usability. So that's what comes from our company. But in general, what we see is that obviously 50% of the population is female. We have an increase, what we're seeing from different studies that we have been reading and been talking about in our online publications, that there is a 50% increase on women's share of global wealth expected over the next few years. And it's actually, from what we read, the majority of the wealth is going to be in women's hands in the near future. And even today, 80% of all global purchasing decisions are influenced or taken by women. So taking this in consideration, it's just very important that the products and the services are including women and are addressed and made to serve the women needs. And I can go maybe a little later into a little more depth what that means for the online advisory that we are facilitating for banks and insurance companies.
So there's, this is a bit of a question to poke at the topic a little bit, which is that sometimes people think of money as being neutral, gender neutral, but it sounds as if we're saying that actually there's a different lens and different view through women and through men. Can you talk a little bit about what is different and what do women value? And is it really different when you need to design things?
If I may, I'm going to quickly continue right there. So the big difference that typically happens in terms of investments into wealth management, investment into products, or where you want to invest your money, is that in general, in the beginning, women are with that one t-shirt size that is available from the wealth management typically today. They are a little more risk avoidant, risk averse, but that's only because they want to know more details. And it's not about a general risk avoidance, but when you educate people about the details of your products and the background, and when you make it transparent and open it up, the risk avoidance is going down very much. And what you can see as a result of this tendency not to jump into risky things is there is a 2% higher ROI for the investments of women than for men.
Maya and Luc, Lucas, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think one aspect to always consider is that, so while there are maybe some, biological difference that are at play, I think a lot of it is also like how we are socialized, also from the socialization, what roles we play. So women are, more likely to be a primary caretaker of a child or an elderly person, and that, brings with different responsibilities. So in that sense, obviously they're going to take different decisions. They're going to look at financial topics differently because the roles that necessarily, they're not from a biological point of view, taking on, but more from, how they were socialized as children and what sort of roles they're being to some degree forced into by society. They're going to handle differently. So it's not necessarily like men versus women, but it's more like how we've, the roles that we sort of as a society have sort of allocated to them. And this is a different of behavior that is, obviously a result of that.
And I mean, money definitely isn't neutral. It means to everybody something different. But what you hear a lot from women is, I don't do it for money. Money doesn't mean so much to me. Basically what Lukas was saying, the way we socialize, if the harmony is given in the whole team, then the woman feels more comfortable, or it's more important to her. That's obviously a bit generalizing, but however, it works mostly like this. And I think we also need to look at the generations. On the one hand, the real wealth, the big wealth is still mostly, except tech billionaires or so, in more older hands. And women get to take care of the money more as widows or later in life, and therefore might not be accustomed to deal with money in that way. And so it also, besides being in general more risk averse, wanting to understand before making a decision, come in almost too late to then make the maximum out of it. I think that will change with the generations. The younger ones and many more women are earning better money, taking care of their own money, taking of pension. That will change. And there it's being more risk averse, even with younger women. One has measured this. And there, if women do not get or being led to more risky investment, which over time are definitely, if that is not happening, that's where we're losing the opportunities. First of all, the women not making the same wealth which they could, but on the other hand, also not being accustomed to investments enough. And this learning early and being spoken in a language which is what women want to be spoken to, respectful and on equal level, I think we're getting there sooner or later, but definitely much further than we were like 10, 15 years ago. Never mind 25 when I started advising customers, clients.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. Actually opening to the next point that we looked at, which is there was a really interesting finding during the research. Annette and Erin, and also with Daria's support, found that many of the companies that they looked at, over 100 of them, were actually founded and led by women. So these are companies that actually focus on women. So this is at the founder level, the leadership level, the board, the employees. And so it also, of course, influenced the company values. We found that the values tended to focus more on culture and empowerment, creativity, and freedom, while companies with a broader market focus tended to prioritize value for money instead. And so this is a bit of an interesting flip in the diversity balance. Is this good for diversity? And do we really need to have truly, truly diverse products and services, product diversity on the teams themselves in order to create the products and services?
Well, if you want to commercially be successful, definitely, because otherwise you limit yourself again. And I think to get started, to better understand, of course, it's easier as a woman to see a woman's viewpoints. But on the other hand, we don't want to limit ourselves. And I say many, many men, and more so, have taken over the values of women. So therefore, it's commercially natural to open up and have a diverse team, having in female founded and led companies males part of the team. Otherwise, it's a reverse segregation, which is not making sense in my viewpoint. Definitely not. It's wrong.
Luc and Lukas?
Yeah, I would say that if what I was saying earlier about like how diversity is not just about justice, but actually also about getting all sorts of viewpoints. That's not just on the product development side, but also how you develop the product, of course. So the processes and methods that have been established, they've been established by a small chunk of actually our human a mental range of ideas that we have, because it's mostly been developed by men of a specific socioeconomic background and skin complexion, etc. So now if you have companies that are being founded by people that are different, then suddenly they can also implement ideas that are different. And in that way, I think what Maya was saying is also true. Even the white male, Caucasian, whatever, is not a homogenic type of person, right? So in that way, it's also liberating, because suddenly you can have people questioning the status quo and doing things differently and operating companies differently. And there are plenty of men that are benefiting from this as well, that didn't dare to question the status quo. Because in a way, it was going okay-ish, right? But we want innovation. That's where the future of humanity is, and so we need people changing the status quo and questioning it.
Yeah, so from my side, my answer is absolutely. I think it's important, and it is changing how we produce products. To be honest, we have had a hard time so far to find women for the engineering jobs. When I started studying computer science at the ETH, we were 500 persons, 4 out of which were women. So computer science was terribly man thing at that time in Switzerland, and it still is predominantly male. So it is hard to find women, but what we're seeing is with a company of about 80 employees, we have a little more than 20 nationalities. We have locations in Europe, UK, and in North America, and we are benefiting a lot from the mix of the different cultures and of the women that we have in our organization. and I think it's just bringing different aspects in. And I think maybe I want to pass back to Lukas on the Apple Watch. I don't want to spoil that, but that's an interesting example of what happens when you forget to involve women in developing a product.
Yeah, so what Luc is alluding to, so we had a previous call where we discussed some of our thoughts on these topics, and I brought up an example of Apple, which is of course known as a company with huge customer satisfaction value, that's always seen as sort of the beacon of light when it comes to product creation. And so they released the Apple Watch I think in 2014. They did provide two different sizes, so it works for people of not just tall men, but could also work for more slender women. They were marketing it in magazines like Vogue and things like that towards women, but even though they announced it as a highly personal health device, a watch with sensors for all sorts of different things, very innovative, they failed to include a period tracker in the first version. And then with the second version, they finally did include a period tracker, and the percentage of women buying Apple Watches made a huge jump, right? So I'm sure that at Apple, there were plenty of women involved in the creation of the Apple Watch, but for some reason, while making the decision about what features to include, that wasn't included, even though it is actually, I'm a programmer, so a period tracker is not hard to do compared to building a heartbeat tracker, right? So for some reason, they deprioritized this feature and prioritized other features, while still then allocating a marketing budget towards women. That is if your product is not designed for women, it's going to be hard to sell it to women. And if you change your product to be designed for women, then you will see a huge jump in adoption.
Yes, absolutely. I remember seeing some of the comments that were all over social media with comments, and then after the question about it being missing, many question marks or exclamation points after that, because people just thought it was both strange but perhaps also a bit annoying that it wasn't there. So I would say, Maya, having been in a traditional field for some time as well, when you look to see how things have changed and how this research seems to have fewer men. You mentioned earlier that a company with not as many men doesn't seem quite right. But do you think that the balance will move and change over in the near future, just because that still the traditional roles are still quite common in many parts of the country?
Nonetheless, I mean, with the higher education of many women, these are all known fact. And since I'm not that young anymore, having 40 years in the finance industry, things have changed already so much. And I already 20 years ago, I kept on saying it's a matter of time.
Yeah.
And I'm quite pleased it's happening. However, and we have mentioned this in different ways now, I think women in some way are more demanding. You can't just sell a woman a product for the pink color or because it's fancy and technical. Interestingly enough, the males buying an Apple Watch didn't decrease because the period was tracked on the new model, which proves that they're more tolerant than they might have been. So balance is anyhow something I believe in. Doesn't need to be 50-50 exactly. And I've experienced a lot of men who have a pretty good understanding of women. And I had teams where I had 2 men, more women, more female in their consideration than some women. Yeah. And so therefore it is important, not just the culture, which I believe is also extremely important, to get different viewpoints into a discussion, into a design. And I think that design, thinking of the unthinkable, or a period, a female period, is perhaps not a topic one talks about on a business table. So therefore it slips under. And it takes also us women to speak up clearer and demand of what we want. And that's formulating our needs is also what we have to bring to the table. But it's happening. It's just definitely, I'm curious. I'm very curious to see what it's like in 5 and 10 years' time.
Right.
And I'll follow it closely and I'll support where I can.
Right. Right. And to Luc and Lukas, was it surprising when you saw the research show that most of the companies that focus on women are founded and led by women? Was that curious, surprising, or it didn't surprise you at all?
So it
Not
didn't
very
surprise
surprising.
me. Go ahead, Lukas.
Yeah, it didn't surprise me. I mean, as a founder, you solve a problem that you see, and therefore, especially if the needs of women in products have not been considered enough, then it's the obvious thing that as a woman you will see these gaps in the products, right? And so you fix them.
Yeah.
Yes. So what we see generally, obviously, I have a style of managing the company as flat hierarchy as possible, to have discussions for decisions on each level, to make sure that we are including all the different opinions. Obviously, then we need to take decisions, and sometimes it's to me as the CEO to take a decision finally after we have discussed. But it's always important to have the different views and to be able to bring in not only gender but really all types of demographics of diversion that are changing how powerful products are, how broad they can be. There is so many things that are, if I would just take decisions myself without any discussions, that we wouldn't have in our product, and we wouldn't be successful. So fully aware of this, and I'm very much driving this to make sure that we are going broad. So totally convinced of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great a point for me to ask my next question, which is really around the opportunity. Oliver Wyman and a number of other companies have done research and have indicated that it is at least a $700 billion US dollar opportunity if you don't think about the female market. And so could I ask each of you to talk a little bit about, what are some really simple steps, easy steps that companies can take to enter this market, and what are you and your company doing next in your work as you pursued DEI?
So from my side, it's really extend the advice, make sure that in the financial advisory that you go from the typical it's good enough by gut instinct, which is rather male, to data driven, and make sure that you get across the details, the background of the information. So I think that's probably the easiest step. You don't have to change your products to do this. You just have to make sure that you go a little broader in advice and not just go with t-shirt sizes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would fully agree on the advice. I think that's the most important part. And Bank Cler has, as I mentioned before, started on the inside with this unconscious bias awareness to actually get the whole workforce to better understand how to face diverse interests and be open-armed, open-eyed into and go like this into an advisory service and take the view of a different understanding, like a female understanding. But besides that, which I think intuitively we also know this, it goes, Bank Cler goes one step now from taking EVA away, going more to the youth, the younger people, also having started mobile banking, the ZAK, which is a fancy name, which is easy to navigate and play with. That's something the younger generation has fun with, brings you closer to the financial industry, and now focusing on servicing, advising, getting to know younger people, but including them in the financial advice, perhaps also in the family. And that's a generation gap, basically having the grandfather or grandmother who is a widow to the parents, and then the youth being also the girls and the boys equally into the advice closer to the financial interests, because you can't start early enough. Mm-hmm. That's important. And if needed, we go out to speeches, and perhaps we go once to schools and help supporting the teachers in financial teaching with kids.
Yep.
Yeah, I want to maybe highlight a little bit the topic, like the word inclusion, because I think what Luc, for example, was describing in his company with this flat structure, the importance is not just that you have women or people of diverse background in the room, but that they are heard, right? So in that way, you have to make sure that if you have these flat hierarchies, that you have a culture in place where actually then these voices feel comfortable speaking up and are heard, because otherwise flat hierarchies can also be harmful, because then even, as a woman, you've earned your dues, but you don't get the title, so you don't even have the power of the title, right? Yeah. So that's very important to really focus on inclusion, and I think what Maya was saying about unconscious bias training, that really helps towards that goal, to really realize how biased we are, and that is actually very much human and okay. Like, there's nothing wrong per se in bias. These are mental shortcuts. They allow us to be productive, but especially if we want to be innovative, we have to make those unconscious biases conscious, so that we can have an actual conscious decision on how we deal with them. And in that spirit, maybe what I want to say is my most concrete advice is, wherever possible, structure things. And this goes a little bit into the direction what Luc was saying with data. Data helps you structure, but you can also structure discussions, you can structure decision making, because if you structure it, you can structure it in a way to expose bias and then change your behavior. And I think that's really a big driving force towards inclusion. In that spirit, I can also maybe promote the product that we're developing at Witty Works, which is a tool that actually, as you type in real time, will give you feedback about the terminology that you're using, the unconscious bias that is contained within that wording, so that you can adjust it and build that more inclusive culture.
That's really amazing. Are there any particular research insights or findings that the three of you found interesting and plan to take them into your own work, or will be discussing them perhaps with people in your organizations?
So one thing that I can mention is definitely from what Maya said, and not from the research that we just heard about, but the shift to, but it ties into it with the shift to younger people. So there is a huge shift coming up in the next 5 to 10 years from the wealth of the boomers being shifted to the millennials. And that's a huge number. I don't want to say the wrong number, so we have written about it. You can find it on our website. There's a lot of research about that. And the important thing about this is 90% of the people that receive that money, that inherit that money, would look for a new advisor, a new place where they put that money. So there is a huge shift. And when you look at the shift to millennials, it also means a shift to a more diverse, definitely more women audience. And therefore, this is very important what we're looking at and what we're talking to banks and insurance companies, that they need to prepare for this. So they better make sure that they are in close contact and involve the generations, and not just focus on the boomers that today have the money mostly, but focus on the families to make sure that they can be part of that transition and not lose the contact.
Right, right. Any last words from the three of you on the panel?
Thank you for making this topic, bringing it out in the market. Very good. And we continue working on it. So much to do, but a lot is on the go.
Yeah.
And thanks for the research.
Yeah, I was also going to add.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Erin and Annette, for the research. I think, as you say it, there is still a lack of data on these topics, right? So more research like yours needs to be made. But yeah, I think it's great that we're seeing this research happening. Yeah, I think it's going to be the start of big things to change.
Absolutely. And if I could just turn it over really quickly to Erin and Annette, are there any final words now that you've heard from the panelists as well, and that you would just want to share?
Yeah, I think I just want to say I really enjoyed the discussion. There's so much food for thought, especially thinking across the generations was the biggest insight for me out of this discussion. Annette and I have discussed that a little bit before, but it's nice to hear different perspectives about what does happen when, you know, it's not just that more women are getting interested in things like investment, particularly on young generations, but also that there are shifts of power in a certain sense from one generation to the other, and that does affect actually the market structure as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'd say thank you so much for your insights and for your comments and for taking the time. It was really a great pleasure to hear your thoughts on something that we have been very concerned about for quite a long time and will continue to look into. I think that it's really great to hear from Maya saying that maybe men will like the products of women as well, which reminds me of the story about a McDonald's launching salads for the mothers coming to and finding that both the mothers and the fathers and the single men would like the salads as well. So maybe we'll see a different kind of change in these products, and maybe it'll just be in its so seeing these companies try. But also the challenges that you raised, Lukas and Luc, on the question of how to the questioning of the status quo and how to work with diversity in many different ways. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And Daria, any final thoughts before we move into the questions that we have in the chat section?
Thank you very much also from my side to all participants. I think that the research like Erin and Annette have been done is really crucial for everyone, for every market player, to bring these insights to the public, to open these questions. And I mean, even in the last year, we see more and more fintech companies coming with new products designed specifically for women, and they are not more advertised just in pink color. So let's hope that our study helped as well.
Right, absolutely. Great. Well, I'd like to transition over to the questions in the chat section. Just as a quick reminder for those of you who were able to stay on, if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat section. I'm going to read out the first one from Susie Miller. And I'll open it to everyone who joined, the panelists, and also to Daria, Annette, and Erin. Apart from more financial services created for women, how do banks, brokers, and insurances change their assessment of women's financial potential? For example, margin mortgage loans, and also for moms and single moms, etc.
I mean, I can talk from the banking product loans. Loans in general have been made, the process of approving a loan has been made more transparent. It's probably more rigid than ever. Before it was more judgment, personal judgment. So in that sense, it's become fairer. But if you grant a loan without sufficient security, then it is not a traditional bank loan. And then it would be for a specialized unit who would say, we do microfinance, or we do a specialized section, which is not really done. I haven't come across anything like this. But I believe giving loans to startups or so, that definitely is a big interest in our bank as a whole, because for the region, if we have female startups, we definitely look at it as favorable, if not a little bit more than before.
Right.
Insurance I can't talk to.
Yeah. Let me move on to the next question. Do you think that COVID has slowed down or reduced the opportunity in the female market?
I think actually the opposite has happened. When I look at just our company and what happened to friends also, is that with the lockdown, people had to take care of their children at home, and we had a clear, I mean, for us, it was natural that it's split 50-50 between men and women. So when they had to have their children at home to homeschooling, that it's really balanced, which I think in turn opened up the chance that it's leveled out between men and women. And what we saw is also, because COVID has accelerated the online conversations, it also opened up additional opportunities because in less time you can have more value discussions, which is also balancing and leveling. So I don't think, I think it's rather the opposite.
Sorry, go ahead, Maya.
Okay, I see a bit the other side. I think more women might be pushed out of the working market, because if it's coming to retrenchments, unfortunately, the part-timers or last in, first out, least experience or so, or lower functions might lose jobs easier right now. And this will have a slowdown on women making their own wealth. And like hairdressers, nail studios, traditional female small and medium enterprises, small enterprises will potentially go out of business.
Yeah, I also wanted to add that I've seen several statistics indicate that actually more women are being forced or leaving the workforce due to COVID and having to take care of being primary caretaker. So in that spirit, I think maybe it illustrates a little bit. So some companies you will see exactly what Luc is describing, and where maybe some men are actually now realizing or taking more responsibility than they did before, and hopefully continue to do that in the future. But I think for the workforce perspective, I think there's a harm. But also similar to what Luc was saying, I think this realization now by many companies that home office can work, that flexible hours can work, will definitely benefit, especially people that are caretakers or have some other responsibilities as well. And hopefully these types of things will remain and could maybe have, even though we now have this short-term impact on the workforce, that maybe the long-term, the way that companies work will become easier for people with different backgrounds.
Right. Great. And we have one more question. What does the panel think about taking this back even further and creating innovative financial education programs for our youth? Encouraging confidence in our youth to speak up and engage in the financial environment will lead to development of products and services to meet their needs, no matter what their gender is.
The idea of financial literacy actually is something Annette and I have been discussing a lot lately. And what we find super interesting is the idea, okay, how do you teach financial literacy these days? In a world of gadgets and phones and user-friendly interfaces and so on, we think it's actually gotten, in many cases, a lot easier to manage your finances. It's, for example, compared with, just a few years ago, if you had to make an investment by logging into your bank and seeing a very complicated screen with lots of numbers on it and lots of terms you don't understand, versus going into an app that makes choices extremely simple. what you might need to learn might be different. We might not need to learn less, but learn different things. So you might need to learn about, for example, how to choose products and services. You might need to learn about, safety in making your decisions. You might need to learn some basics still of investing, for example, of course, but you might need, not necessarily so much technical information, but more information about consumer choice and how to choose the right products and services for you. And that is really relevant to youth, because the youth are the ones who are increasingly going to be using these different kinds of apps that do make financial management easier.
And I'd like to add just a very short comment on a practical issue, because there's something called the Money Week. I think it's actually initially a Dutch initiative, but I think it's picked up across Europe, at least here in Denmark, that actually does this. Creates reports, put bankers into schools to discuss things and hopefully learn something to take back to their organizations as well. So you might want to look that up.
Great. And we have a question for the panel. The last one is, has anyone on the panel done any research on the topic of women in the crypto market and have insights to share?
We have not, sorry.
Yeah, I can also not claim to have done research, but I have some observations maybe. So the crypto market in many ways is, at least from my perspective, I'm not deep in the crypto market, but so in the IT industry, I'm in the open source space, which is already more male dominated than general IT. And from what I've seen, the crypto area is even more male dominated still. And I think part of it is maybe also, again, socialization. I think a lot of people in the crypto market are doing it kind of because we can. It's kind of like a great adventure. You can put down a flag, but very few people are actually wondering about what the goal is here. And I see a lot of people that are arguing for crypto are very much coming from the point where they say, okay, I've invested in this, now I have to find a reason why it makes sense to society and not the other way around. And I think there is a lot of potential in the crypto market to help society, but I think many people are approaching it. And I think Bitcoin as sort of the beacon of the cryptocurrencies is a very good example. It's a huge energy hog. So it's creating an insane amount of energy, or energy is consumed for Bitcoin. And that's not necessarily because cryptocurrencies have to be built that way. It's just the way how Bitcoin was that. And it's a design flaw. There have been proposals to fix it, but it's been pushed to the side as not important. And I think it very much exemplifies sort of the problems of, a non-diverse bro culture, approach to technology, how the crypto market is developing.
Right. Absolutely. And just as a quick promotion for an event that we will have coming up, it's going to be over the summer, Mayor. We will have someone from our country ambassador group and team join. Her name is Mirab. She's the country ambassador for Israel, and we'll be talking a little bit to her. She actually has worked in crypto for some time. You can find her listed on our website, and she'll also probably share a little bit about NFTs and just how alternative financing goes. So that might be interesting for you in the future. So are there any other questions before we close the event today? Feel free to unmute your microphone if you just want to ask directly. No? Okay, well, great. Thank you so much. And with that, I'd love to conclude this event. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And thank you also to all the panelists and to our authors. We really appreciate all the efforts that you have put in there. It's been a great event. And with that, I'd like to conclude the event. I will stop the record button. For any of you who would like to see this event again or rewatch it, you can look for it on our social media, and we'll post a link